Hi, my name is Jenny Brems, and I am going to be posting my discussion via video to Module 5 questions. The first question says, pick 2 social learning theories or models discussed in Chapter 8 and explain how they are reflected in literacy instruction and research. The first theory I chose to focus on is the sociolinguistic theory, which basically says that language is learned as a result of people's social interactions with each other. So therefore, language patterns kind of coincide with educational and social class differences, which lead to differences in learning abilities. As far as its reflection in literacy instruction, the textbook cited for grades K through 3 using something called a language experience chart, which honestly sounded something really weird and new and different to me, but then I realized that I do this all the time. So to me, it kind of seems like interactive writing. So basically, it's writing a story using the input from your students. So writing about a class trip or something that the class experienced together, where the kids help contribute ideas. They help with spelling the words and adding in new and different things. Kind of re-emphasizing the process of rereading what you've written so far, thinking of what you can add. Goes along with sociolinguistic theory because it's using language together as like a social experience. Also along with that is using morning message in a similar way, so collaboratively writing about what the day will be like. So writing what special they'll go to, if it's someone's birthday, the different things that you're going to be learning, which also kind of re-authenticates reading because there is a purpose for it. So if you keep the morning message up or if you flash back to it, it kind of teaches the importance of it because kids are going back to read to find out information or to answer their own questions about the day. As far as research, the text mentioned Hart and Risley study, and this study found that basically differences in how many words children learn based on the status or class of their parents. So for example, they said that children from professional homes were exposed to 11.2 million words in a year, whereas those from working class homes were only exposed to about 6.5 million, and children from welfare homes to only 3.2 million. This wasn't all that shocking to me. I feel like in my classes before, we've kind of learned the same things, that kids kind of come to school with different experiences, and you can usually tell the kids you have that grew up or participating in shopping for groceries. Their parents were telling them what they're buying when they're putting in the cart. They're asking about what they need, what's on the list. They're telling them when they get dressed in the morning, oh, you're picking the red shirt, you're wearing the blue jeans, we need to match this with this, versus the kids that just aren't talked to as much. So kind of if they're not talked to as much, then they don't have those words, which just makes everything with literacy harder for them. A second study in the text was Shirley Bryce Heath's study, which just basically verified the above study, just saying that the interactions between parent and children just varies greatly according to cultural backgrounds, educational, and socioeconomic status as well, which kind of goes along with what we learned about in the last module with if parents are having to deal with physiological needs like hunger or shelter, things like that, they're probably not going to be having as many conversations or reinforcing the things learned at school with their kids. It's just not able to be a priority. So sad but true. The second theory I chose to focus on is the sociocultural theory, which focuses more on culture and less of the language aspects of the social interactions. In regards to literacy instruction, they recommend it for grades 3 and up using literature circles, which I actually did these when I taught 3rd grade as well. Basically, it's kind of like a book club where students learn from talking with each other about a text. It's important because it allows them to bring knowledge and artifacts from their own lives into the conversation, thereby emphasizing that culture aspect. Also, it talked about kind of how to set them up, and usually one of the defining things of literature circles is students having different roles. It listed several of them. Discussion director, which I was familiar with, basically where a student comes prepared with a few deeper questions for the group to discuss together, maybe thick questions and not thin questions. Passage master was a little new to me. It's someone who has chosen 3 or 4 different or important sections for them to kind of look back and dig deeper into. The vocabulary enricher chooses a few words that are unfamiliar or important words to kind of define and discuss. Artist was always a popular one when I did before. We called it illustrator, but basically they have to kind of show a visual representation of an important part. Connector, similar to what I discussed in my last paper, they make the connections, text to text, text to self, all those different things. Investigator was a new one for me, but they kind of go outside the text and look for other relevant pieces that kind of tie into it, so articles, books, another internet site. And finally, the summarizer was never my kids' favorite, but an important one where they have to prepare a summary of what they read that week, so whether it be a chapter or a section of the book. And then the roles, at least how I've done it, is the roles usually rotate every so often so that students get a taste of all the different jobs in that literature circle to be more well-rounded. Excuse me. For research, Tracy and Morrow cited Mall's studies, which basically found that typical white middle-class classrooms aren't usually designed in ways that cater to kids that aren't that way, so that are not non-white, non-middle class. Basically, he found that these kids that come with different funds of knowledge, is what he said, knowledge from their homes and communities just isn't valued, and so it kind of leads people to assume that they aren't as capable or that they don't know as much as their white middle-class peers, which is definitely a sad reality. I think we definitely see this a lot. I know at my school in particular, it's no secret that on test scores, the white middle class and wealthy families are all green flags and all doing amazingly well. And the Title I families, Black Hispanic kids, are underscoring and they're not making the growth as the other kids. So it's a major concern, but it's just a reality of what we're dealing with. And a lot of standardized test scores or standardized tests just aren't geared towards non-white middle-class students, it seems like. They're missing a lot of experiences that a lot of our school population brings with them. And along with Mall's studies, he basically said that teachers need to find ways to find the value in different experiences beyond the white middle-class kids, and finding ways, whether it be having them bring in parts of their culture, including guest speakers, or just being more aware of what they know, even if it's not what the curriculum values. The second question for discussion 5 says, how can educators practically apply literacy-based research through professional learning communities, PLCs? I thought this was pretty interesting because our school this year has taken a major push towards PLCs. In some ways, I think we're making good gains, and we have a lot of structure in regards to when we're meeting. In other ways, I think we have a lot of room to grow, but this article was interesting. The one I mean is by Stahl, using professional learning communities to bolster comprehension instruction. So in regards to the research and kind of what that research lends to, the first theory mentioned was constrained skills theory, which basically is a reconceptualization of how reading develops. So it basically says that students learn best when they can focus on a few things until they master it for a short amount of time. And whereas they said comprehension and vocabulary are learned across a lifetime. So it all depends on the content, the purpose, the instructional context, things like that. Since it is such a big overarching theory, Stahl wrote that this theory influences everything about PLCs. So schedule allocation, so what subjects are getting what amount of time, instructional decisions, school-wide assessment system. So basically checking in to see what students have mastered, is it time to move on, things like that. The text also mentioned the Soulsby scale, which basically was very interesting to me. It quantifies a child's ability to pretend to read a story. So it mentioned a lot of wordless books and doing things like picture walks, along with Paris and Paris's study. So they both talked about using PLCs as a time to choose meaningful read-alouds that align with the unit, that are good, high-quality literature. And along with choosing the books, also choosing questions to go along with it. I know this is something we don't have a lot of time to do, but it usually pays off in the end when you kind of pre-choose the questions, either writing them on sticky notes on the pages, things like that. They also discussed writing scripts for administering these two different tests, the Soulsby scale and the Paris and Paris test, for when they go through the wordless books or the picture walks, which I think is good because even if you do the same test, you never know if you're actually on the same page as your team when giving it in separate rooms. Next, the fluency-oriented reading instruction, the FORI and wide reading FORI, says it is a week-long protocol of repeated reading of a stretched text. So when I broke down those words, it made me think of Junior Great Books, which is something I've used in the past, where you do read one story for an entire week, kind of each day for a different purpose. And normally, to me, it is considered a stretched text because they're either listening to it on tape or listening to the teacher read it. So they mentioned this as well. In PLCs, they said work together to choose these texts, and also divide up the planning of those lessons. So when I think about Great Books, they had a different kind of lesson for each day. One might be on questioning, one might be on the discussion, one might be on vocabulary. So they recommend it in a PLC, once you've chosen the text, dividing and conquering so that you address all those areas of literacy from that one text. Finally, Shanahan and Shanahan emphasized the importance of integration, and so basically not teaching science and social studies in isolation, that it should not be a 30-minute block of something science and then you don't discuss it ever again, that it should be integrated into reading, writing, and language. As an IB school, this is pretty major. We don't even have a science and social studies block because we try and integrate it throughout all the different subject areas through key concepts and things like that. So as far as applying that in PLCs, they recommended agreeing on the same rubrics for certain tasks, like writing specifically, and even evaluating writing together. I think this is also one of those things that we would love to do. We just don't do it together enough. We use Lucy Calkins as our writing system, so even though they have rubrics already, sometimes we interpret them very differently. So I think it is definitely beneficial to grade at least a few of them together to kind of make sure you're all on the same page. Also, Shanahan and Shanahan's research recommends, with regards to writing, agreeing on the same prompts to use. So just like we do common formative assessments, using the same prompts that would mirror the level of difficulty used in high-stakes testing situations. So just so that the kids are getting prepared and used to that rigor. So those are my answers for discussion Module 5, and I hope you enjoyed them. Thanks.